Throughout the series of Jujutsu Kaisen, we'd get many inklings of the potential of Yuji Itadori. As the child of Kenjaku, star pupil of Gojo, and grandnephew of Sukuna, Yuji was bound to become one of the most powerful and complete sorcerers in history. However, we would never see this ultimate sorcerer come to fruition, as Sukuna would be defeated and the world would be brought to peace for a long time to come, concluding the story there. But I had to ask, what if we got to see Yuji maximize all of his stats, grow into an adult, and master his insane list of abilities and techniques? How strong would he actually become? Would this fully realized Yuji Itadori be able to match the likes of Kenjaku, Sukuna, and Gojo? Well, in this video, that's exactly what I'll be covering. We'll be going over everything Yuji can do, how much he can actually improve each of his techniques and abilities, and attempting to gauge how powerful this full potential Yuji would have been had we ever got to see him in action. With that said, if you enjoy content such as this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and now, let's get into it. When it comes to trying to estimate the full potential of Yuji Itadori, I think the first thing we should cover are his potential stats, as that would play a role into the potency of everything else he can do. As we already know, Yuji as a teenager has some of the highest raw physical strength in the series, being able to combat somebody as powerful as Higuruma without any cursed energy and sending massive blocks of concrete flying with his kicks. We eventually come to see Yuji hanging with a weakened version of Sukuna within the Shinjuku Showdown, being able to hurt him throughout the fight and even slam him through an entire building, destroying it in the process. Yuji is without a doubt one of the most physically powerful characters only as a teenager, so I believe as his body matures and he becomes an adult, he's only going to become even more powerful. And this applies to his speed as well. Although the heavy hitters are all relative in terms of speed and can keep up with one another at the moment, Yuji's physical specifications are going to allow him to eventually surpass the 3 in speed. If Sukuna is even the slightest bit of an indication of Yuji's potential physical peak, he will be leaving them in the dust. Of course, Yuji's not going to get 4 arms or anything crazy like that, but if he grows to even half of what Sukuna's body was capable of, he's gonna be insane. Remember, Sukuna in a weakened state was able to stand still as a piercing blood was shot toward him, blitz the piercing blood, and reappear with his arm through Choso's stomach as if he were Dio with the world. Remember, piercing blood was stated to move at the speed of sound. These are the levels of speed that I expect Yuji to be at his base state when he's grown up, bare minimum. There's also Yuji's defense and endurance to consider, but I would even say that as a teenager, Yuji had the second highest endurance in the series, only behind Kenjaku, who has never been shown to even wince at pain once. Yuji's pretty much able to withstand any attack in the series and stand up, so even if he's an adult, I can't see that reaching a higher level or point already. Maybe he'd be able to further reinforce his body with binding vows or something of that nature to increase his durability, but as for endurance, I don't think Yuji needs an upgrade, and durability isn't that big of a deal either, as Yuji can regenerate from almost anything, considering the fact that he ate his Curse Moon brothers and gained their biology. Yuji should also have his battle intelligence overall increase due to experience and maturity. This would allow him to concoct better battle tactics and strategies, meanwhile being able to decipher the strategies of other sorcerers. I would also say that this category can be improved, but it doesn't need much improving, as Yuji is already a battle genius from my perspective. A lot of his plays during the Sukuna raid prove this, such as his ability to place a binding vow on his newly earned curse technique soon after obtaining it in order to make it deal direct damage to the soul, or how he was always able to position himself in the perfect spot to land direct attacks on Sukuna within multiple chapters. Even without this, we see multiple examples of Yuji figuring out his opponent's curse techniques and making some kind of plan to counter them. I think that Yuji would be able to do things like the 1 million IQ play that Gojo did against Mahoraga and Sukuna in the final chapters of their battle after many more years of practicing Jujutsu in combat. I mean, he was already fighting some of the most dangerous characters in existence with only a few months of experience already. Now, at his full potential, Yuji's physical body won't just be at its peak, but his curse energy should be as well. It should be refined to a level that matches Sukuna. If you remember, Kusakabe pointed out in chapter 258 that Sukuna did inhabit Yuji's body and use all of that divine level Jujutsu within it, allowing Yuji to be imprinted with his cursed techniques and his skill of using them. Not only this, but Shoko did point out that Yuji containing Sukuna for as long as he did allowed him to become a cursed object imbued with Sukuna's cursed energy. So in a way, Yuji became a mini Sukuna. I think Yuji, after training in the last arc and learning all of these things, should have both an idea of how far his curse energy can truly go, and the capacity of actually achieving these divine level of curse energy reserves, reinforcement, and output. But what does that actually entail? As we can see from both Gojo and Sukuna, they operate at levels of strength that allow them to one-shot special grade sorcerers before they're even able to realize that they've been attacked. If Yuji's already operating around the level that Gojo was when he was a teenager but with way less experience and training, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that Yuji can eventually catch up with the two in terms of reinforcement and output. Now I do have to make this clear. Sukuna does get a decent boost from the constant chanting and hand signs of his Heian era form, and I don't believe Yuji is catching up to all of that, but in terms of just a regular Sukuna without the constant boosting, I think Yuji can at least reach a plateau. Not only this, but Kashima would point out that in the middle of the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, Sukuna was able to utilize his curse energy reserves with such efficiency that it's divine, and he can even rival the 6 Eyes in that department. Now, judging from the fact that Yuji was able to fight as much as he did against Sukuna non-stop, heal himself as many times as he did, and cast a potent domain expansion at the end of it all, it indicates that Yuji either has a ton of curse energy, or like Sukuna, he's able to use his curse energy at an extremely efficient level. Another technique to combo on top of Yuji's ability to manage his curse energy is the Black Flash. If you forgot, the Black Flash is a phenomena that creates a distortion in space when the user manages to connect an impact of curse energy within 1/1,000,000th of a second of a physical hit, serving as basically a critical hit. The effects of the Black Flash will cause any attack to have its potency increased to the power of 2.5 and grant a temporary awakening to the user. The effects of awakening a sorcerer tends to increase their stats to 120% of their normal capacity, and they seem to recover their curse energy at a heightened speed. Yuji is the sorcerer with the most Black Flashes landed in the story, and has the highest streak of them ever recorded, being able to land 7 in a row in the final arc. The narrator has even outright said at some points that it's almost as if Yuji Itadori can manifest these Black Flashes at will, and even some of his greatest enemies would almost confirm this too, as they somehow just knew when Yuji was going to send a Black Flash their way. After many more years of combat and getting the hang of curse energy, I wouldn't say Yuji is going to be making every single one of his punches Black Flashes, but maybe every other punch could be a Black Flash. If there's one character who could potentially turn the Black Flash into something they can actually control, it would be him, and if he were to actually control this technique, he'd be unstoppable. Of course, when it comes to fundamental techniques, Yuji would only get better at things such as reverse curse technique by improving both the quality and efficiency of his own curse energy, combined with the usage of his blood manipulation. I can see his regeneration reaching a point where it rivals curse spirits if you already think it doesn't. I mean, Sukuna put a massive hole in his stomach and he got right back up to fight later on in the chapter. There's also the simple domain technique he copied from Kusakabe. Now, I'm not sure if he'd be able to actually manipulate the technique in the way that Kusakabe would, but if he's able to and decides to ever pick up a sword, he'd be able to counter domain expansions near instantaneously without even having to expand his own, and save his domain expansion in the event that the simple domain burst rush doesn't work out. If Yuji never uses a sword, then he's just got a decent simple domain. Now let's go over his 2 curse techniques, Shrine and Blood Manipulation. As we know, Yuji's cleave and dismantles are a tiny bit different from Sukuna's in their own unique ways, but we can still predict the limits of these techniques as these differences aren't that big of a deal. Nothing indicates that Yuji's cleave is too different from Sukuna's cleave besides the visual effects that Yuji's cleave has with the scissor marks. And remember, Sukuna noted that Yuji's output for this technique was extremely weak because he had only recently obtained it, but this same low output technique was able to easily remove Sukuna's legs when Yuji used it on him directly. I believe that's enough proof to show that it functionally works the same as Sukuna's cleave and allows Yuji to adjust to his targets, and that it would be exceptionally powerful once Yuji's able to use it at his full capacity. I don't think Yuji actually needs to train the technique or anything like that, as again, Sukuna did inhabit Yuji's body and repeatedly used this same curse technique within it, so Yuji's body more than likely memorizes how to use it. As for Dismantle, Yuji is unable to launch the technique at distances like Sukuna was, but he can use it to directly attack the souls of his opponents, which I think is a fair trade-off knowing how skilled Yuji is at hand-to-hand combat. I can only see this technique becoming more powerful like Cleave, as Yuji is allowed to output more curse energy for it, but I can also see him implementing more binding vows onto it depending on the situation, because you also have to remember, Yuji came up with that dismantle binding vow for Sukuna specifically. I wish they went into that a bit more because I think the binding vow Yuji made was to restrict the ability to launch slashes as projectiles in exchange for allowing the slashes to directly damage the soul, but we'll never know. We don't need to ponder it as much, as Yuji would likely be at Sukuna levels of strength at his full potential and could probably obliterate anybody's soul with a pinky if he got his hands on them. Most characters can't really combat against that either, making him insanely busted already. Now we have Yuji's blood manipulation. As we know, Yuji couldn't use this ability to do anything but make it easier for him to use reverse curse technique, reattach his limbs, things of that nature. It was purely a tool to make his regenerative and defensive capabilities easier to manage. This was because he just couldn't learn everything about this technique within the span of a month. But now that Yuji has time to learn and actually maximize his potential, he's gonna have access to everything Choso can do. Realistically, Yuji is probably not gonna be able to do Supernova, but for the sake of the video, he'll have access to that ability. Whether Yuji can do it or not is lost in translation because we all know Jujutsu Kaisen had pretty bad translations, so I'm not too sure. Supernova is gonna allow Yuji to basically create multiple blood orbs with convergence and throw them at his opponents to detonate them as grenades. This technique doesn't really seem too impressive, but remember, Kenjaku revealed his technique just to avoid being hit by it directly. It's been noted that moments like this are signs of strength, as Mei pointed out that the three monsters of the series would avoid her bird strike rather than directly take the hit, and to her, this was an indicator of how powerful her technique was. Now I'm sure in the hands of somebody as powerful as this full potential Yuji, it's probably going to take out anybody in the series. Yuji will also be able to create Choso's blood knife, which would seamlessly fit into his fighting style, the wall of blood, which was able to tank Sukuna's flame arrow, generate a piercing blood solo, which gives Yuji a very strong long range option, and flowing red scale, which would be an insane boost to stack on top of an awakening from a black flash. Blood manipulation is really going to complement Yuji's fighting style, as he's quite a brutal and bloody fighter, so he'll be able to use it as armor or just have a lot of opportunities to sneak in attacks. Yuji having access to so many options within a battle through his two curse techniques would be insanely difficult for anybody to manage. Remember, Gojo and Sukuna already had enough trouble managing the 5 to 6 options that their opponent had. But to be honest, facing Gojo would probably be a huge problem for Yuji even with all these buffs, as he still has no way around the infinity. Now sadly, sorcerers cannot use two different techniques at once, but it would be cool if we'd be able to explore some of the possibilities we could get from combining both of these techniques anyway. At the peak of Yuji's abilities come his domain expansion. It's unnamed sadly, but we know it resembles his hometown, changes the settings with each attack landed within it, and the sure hit effect is a soul rendering dismantle, which seems to do a ton of damage, as Sukuna would reel from it pretty bad even after regaining his reverse curse technique. I'm gonna go ahead and outright say it. I think Yuji would be able to create an open domain at his peak. He's already experienced Sukuna do it in his own body, and he was able to implement binding vows into his techniques as soon as he got them. On top of that, he witnessed the entire Gojo vs Sukuna battle go down. I think Yuji has more than enough battle IQ to piece it all together and eventually refine it to a level that allows him to stand with the best. Of course, Yuji gets all the buffs that come along with it, and maybe he can take on something similar to the flame arrow on top of it all, but I really think the endless soul dismantles that will strike his opponents down are enough for the technique to be devastating. Anyway, I don't think Yuji's as bad at domain refinement as people think. He was desperate in doing what he thought was best to cast a domain expansion, which was replicating whatever Sukuna did through muscle memory. And if you remember, Sukuna casted a massive domain expansion himself. That's more than likely why Yuji ended up doing the same rather than confining it to make it more potent. I'm pretty sure that's something he could fix the next time he casts his domain expansion, so he's not really behind there. When it comes to domain expansion, I don't see much Yuji needs to improve on, and he can really just use his Sukuna blueprint to figure out the open barrier. A full potential adult Yuji would be insane and be able to do everything but domain amplification only because Gojo's gone. I say that because there's no reason to learn it if the infinity isn't around. I do think that he'd have a harder time fighting Gojo than Sukuna due to the obvious matchup issues with the infinity, but overall, he'd have a case for rivaling some of the most powerful characters in the series. With that said, I believe a fully realized Yuji would be able to match the strongest. but I don't think he's stomping them out as Sukuna still has the ability to cut the world, and again, for the last time, Gojo has the Infinity. You guys tell me down below if I missed anything to account for when calculating the strength of a fully realized Yuji, and let me know. Do you guys agree with my estimation of him being able to rival the strongest, or do you think he surpasses them, or he doesn't reach that point yet? With that said, thank you guys so much. I'll be looking out for the comments below this video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.